Hello, and welcome to the Real American Revolution, a multimedia program to discuss with noted authors and historians what really happened before, during, and after America's War for Independence. My name is Randy Flood, and today my guest is historian Ray Raphael, who happens to be a senior advisor to the Real American Revolution. Ray's book, Founding Myths, Stories That Hide Our Patriotic Past, was the initial inspiration for establishing the Real American Revolution, our nonprofit. A Phi Beta Kappa graduate from Reed College, Ray has master's degrees from University of California at Berkeley and Reed College. Currently serving as an associate editor for the Journal of the American Revolution, Ray is the author of numerous books. People's History of the American Revolution, The First American Revolution Before Lexington and Concord, Founders, The People Who Brought You a Nation, The Complete Idiot's Guide to the Founding Fathers and the Birth of Our Nation, Constitutional Myths, What We Get Wrong and How to Get It Right, The Constitution Explained, Clause by Clause for Every American Today, Hamilton, Founding Father, and The Spirit of '74, How the American Revolution Began, which he co-authored with his wife, Marie. Ray, welcome to the Real American Revolution. Delighted to have you here.
Yeah, I like talking with you, Randy. It's good to see you in this respect. It was even better to see you in person when we did the Yorktown event.
Oh, that was a nice event. That sure was.
Yeah.
Well, Ray,
Society of Cincinnati. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Ray, the first of your 10 books on our founding era was A People's History of the American Revolution, and the subtitle states clearly the book's theme, how common people shaped the American Revolution. But your second book, The First American Revolution Before Lexington and Concord, is less well known. It really shouldn't be. Can you walk us through that book's remarkable discovery and how you came about it?
Yeah, it's really quite a story. It started with my research for the People's History of the American Revolution. And of course, I was looking at how common people shaped the revolution of all sorts. Common soldiers, farm wives, people you never think about. The common soldiers you think about, but a lot of other people, the African Americans, Native Americans, and even religious pacifists. There were so many aspects to the revolution, and all of these people had to somehow cope with the turmoil of the times, and they kind of become political players. Like, how are they going to fit into it all? And so I'm doing research all across the board, and I come across this one story from secondary sources, and this kind of casual references to crowd actions and rural unrest. Those are quotes: crowd actions, rural unrest in Western Massachusetts. And that's kind of before the revolution. And I say, well, that's interesting. What were these crowd actions, and what did that rural unrest, what did it constitute? And it sounded like there was just a bunch of farmers showing up with their pitchforks or something. And that's not what I found when I went to the archives. What I found to the archives is the people in Massachusetts, throughout the countryside of Massachusetts. And remember, only 5% of the people at the time in Massachusetts lived in Boston. All the rest are in the outskirts. 95% of the people are it's basically a rural society. And those people outside of Boston, everywhere outside of Boston, and every county outside of Suffolk County, which is where Boston is, they totally shed British rule in 1774, the year before Lexington and Concord. And so, but how do you find that out? Well, I had to go to the primary sources, into the archives, and there I found basically the true story. You could go back to for instance, the minutes of the committees of correspondence, because the committees of correspondence were formed the idea was in 72. And then they kind of get formed throughout the rural Massachusetts, spread from Boston. And so those committees you start reading those journals, and you can actually see the progress and how things got increasingly more radical over time. And now to give you the big picture, then we all know about the Tea Party, and we all know about the coercive acts, or the intolerable acts, however you wish to call them. But usually the story focuses on the Boston Port Act. It closed the Port of Boston, and very upset by that, closing the Port of Boston, and somehow that led to a year and a half later to Lexington and Concord. But in fact, it did upset people, the closing of the Port of Boston, and the committees of correspondence were very much in tune with that, and they were really aggravated by it, and things were getting more and more unruly here. So what did the Parliament do? They passed not only the Boston Port Act, but the Massachusetts Government Act, and that is the key, because the Massachusetts government, it actually took away the 1691 Charter of Massachusetts, which was actually allowed a lot of self-rule. People elected their own representatives. They had their own town meetings. They governed locally on their own with town meetings. That town meeting elected a representative, and the representatives met together, and the representatives had a good amount of power. For instance, the judges and the executive officials to exercise, British authority on the local level. They all had to be approved by the representatives who were elected by the town meetings. So it was a very democratic structure, and we lose track of that. This town meeting, fundamental structure that we had throughout Massachusetts was very fundamental, and it had been going on since for over half a century, and it was very ingrained into the way of life. And suddenly, totally revoked. The Massachusetts Government Act said, no way, you can have a town meeting, one a year for the purpose of electing a representative. That's it. Okay, they said, and those representatives, they used to have a say in choosing the judges and the jurors and the court-appointed officials. They'd have to sign off on it. Nope, they just got written out. So basically, all the democratic substructure of the government of Massachusetts had been taken away, stripped away. Now, imagine if that happened today. Suddenly, they say, sorry, your Constitution is no good. Forget it. That's what really ticked people off. So like in the town of Worcester, just before the Massachusetts Government Act, the town was very evenly divided between Tories and Whigs, basically. And they had several votes about resolutions, and they just barely passed one way or the other. The Whigs were kind of one, but the other guys had this big protest, and it was very contentious. But as soon as the Massachusetts Government Act comes, oh my gosh, instead of being like a 45-55 split, 90% of Massachusetts just said, heck no, no way. And so the committees of correspondence, what they did is they said there were quarterly sessions of the courts. And the courts then were more than just like, trying people for a traffic fine or something. They were also basically the administrative arm of local government. They were the farthest reach of parliamentary authority, the convening in the quarterly courts. So they said it started in the first one to convene after the Massachusetts Government Act took effect, which was on, I think it was August 6th, 1774, was in the westernmost county. It was in Great Barrington, from Hampshire County, from Berkshire County. And so 1,500 people from around that rural place got together, and they shut the court out and wouldn't let the judges in, shut down. The next one was in Springfield, moving a little farther east, kind of central there, and that's Hampshire County. And there, 3,000 people converged on the day that they're supposed to convene the court, and the people march. And now getting this all from primary sources. And so the guy who wrote the letter, he says, and people marched with staves and music. and basically just said, sorry, judges, you guys are out of here. and they wouldn't let the court sit. And so Gage is getting word of this, Governor Gage, General Gage, and says, okay, this has to stop. And the next one is due in Worcester. And that's for September 6th. Anyway, so in Worcester, Gage says we're going to hold the line there, and he actually sends out some spies and so on, like, how are we going to do this? Anyway, but the Worcester people, they are really organized. So in all the townships, 37 townships across Worcester County, all the way from the Rhode Island to the New Hampshire border. 37 townships. They get together, and their militia, which is basically the military embodiment of the people, they say we're going to go to Worcester and stop it. And sure enough, they'd head out there. But meanwhile, Gage then hears that the people are so, that this great embodiment of the people is going to oppose him, and he says, well, I guess I'm not going to go after all. He thinks better of it, because everybody said you're out of your league here, and so he doesn't show up. But those people go anyway, and so they converge on the city. Originally they were going to be armed, but then the word comes out that you don't need the arms, and they still, not all the companies got it. Remember, these people are marching through the day and night. Some of them were more than 50 miles to get into Worcester on the appointed day, and they show up in town. And one of the Breck Parkman actually was there. He was a participant, and he actually went around and did a head count of how many people were in each one of these 37 militia units. Remember, this isn't the kind of militia that we talk about today with a bunch of people with arms and stuff. These are the government. The militias are the local government. There's two aspects of the local government: the town meeting and the militia. That's the military embodiment of it. And so these are official people. So anyway, he goes around and he counts each one. Some of a little rough count, because there's a few kind of numbers like 50. There are more 50s than 47s, but a lot of them are like very precise, 17, 48 or something like that. And you can see all the numbers actually in his dad. He sends the numbers to his dad, and his dad, Ebenezer Parkman, who's a reverend, he records them in his diary. And that diary I found housed in the American Antiquarian Society. So wow, like, wait a sec, that's like the smoking gun for this whole thing. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And then they describe what actually happened. And then there were other source accounts to confirm what happened. This is from several accounts. They show up and there's too many people to be right. Well, first of all, before dawn, they enter the courthouse. They take over the courthouse before dawn, and then there's this big meadow not far that houses most of them. Where they camp. But when the judges show up, there's actually 24 court-appointed officials. Court officials to basically execute the will of the crown and administer the government. And they're shut out. So they go and meet in Daniel Hayward's cavern, where they're kind of cowering down there. And meanwhile, on the meadow, people are saying, well, what's going to happen next? Okay, to shut down. So they said, we got to get these people to promise that they're not going to do this. We got to basically make this official. And so they send a committee in to to talk with the people, and to talk with the officials and say, okay, they write out a draft of what they're going to have to sign. But before it's official, they have to take that draft out to the 37 militia units and have them sign off on it. How democratic is this? And so finally they get the draft, they get it done, they get it in, and all the court officials have to vow. Okay. Okay, but we got to make a show of this. So 4,622 militiamen lined both sides of Main Street. There's about a half mile between the Haywood's Tavern and the courthouse. They lined the line all the way, both sides of Main Street. And one by one, each official comes out, takes his hat, puts him in his hand like this, and says, "I promise I will never execute the authority of this unjust, terrible Massachusetts Government Act." And then he says that once. Well, the other guys can't hear. So 30 times each, they have to do as they go through, so everybody can hear in this. I mean, how rich is this, and where is this in our textbooks? And then in Plymouth, it proceeded to happen in every county, and then in Plymouth, they batted 4,000 people there. No direct number there. That's the estimate. And they succeed very easily in doing the same thing. But some of the rowdies got so pumped up, they go, "We're going to move Plymouth Rock from where it is. We're going to lift it up. We have so much power. We're going to lift it up, take it to the courthouse. That's going to be." And so this is from a diary from an observer. But finding it to weigh 10 tons at least, they left it where it was. So that's why Plymouth Rock still is. Well, you get the idea. So basically, and that's the end. Every county outside of Boston, Suffolk County, which we'll return to later, is the only one that does not basically say shut down the courts. Why don't they shut down the courts, even though the big name patriots are there? Because there's an army there. There, Gage can keep the court open because he's got the army right there.
Sure.
But everywhere else, it's shut down. And from that moment on, this was happening in August, September, and early October. Every time the courts were slated to meet, from that moment on, all British authority ceased throughout Massachusetts. There was no authority whatsoever outside of Boston. And meanwhile, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next is that, well, something's got to happen. Somebody's got to be in charge here. So they actually gather the committees of correspondence, get together and say, support this. And the town meetings say, yeah, we need to do this. And so the town meetings, which are the official units, committees are kind of the politicized unit, but the official town meetings, they elect representatives to a provincial Congress. And starting in early October, this provincial Congress starts meeting and saying, okay, what do we do now? What do we do now? So anyway, so some of them want to really go farther yet. They say, we need to declare and form a new and independent government. We need to form a new and independent government. So the town of Worcester, in October 4th, 1774, okay, in their instructions, remember, in these days, they're so democratic that every time, when they send a representative to previously to the General Court, but to the Massachusetts Assembly, but now to the Provincial Congress, they instruct them what to do. And so here is the instructions issued to the blacksmith Timothy Bigelow. You are to consider the people of this province absolved on their part from the obligation therein contained, and that's the old charter, okay? And to all intents and purposes reduced to a state of nature. And you are to exert yourself in devising ways and means to raise from the dissolution of the old Constitution, as from the ashes of the phoenix, a new form, wherein all officers shall be dependent on the suffrages of the people, whatever unfavorable constructions our enemies put upon such procedure. So basically, this is the first declaration by a public body in favor of independence. Now, turns out, there was another, Pauline Maier, who became a very close friend and associate. She had written a book called American Scripture, where she found 90 of these documents, kind of declarations supporting independence from state and local bodies before the Declaration, but all hers were from the early 1776. This is from the fall of 74. This is like a year, this is a year and a half before, well, more than that. This is 21 months, exactly 21 months before Congress's declaration. The people of Worcester are ready to declare independence. Okay, now the story goes on, and we can talk more about the story, what happens next, and we'll probably do that when we talk about my next book. But for now, what we have to realize is that this is such a momentous discovery that and well, in the common today's terminology, it blew me away. I mean, how in the world can this event have been overlooked this amount of time? I mean, this was the trigger it all, and this story actually, launched two other books that I think we'll be talking about in the near future.
Sure. Well, this is absolutely fascinating, the research that you uncovered. But why don't we know about this today? Nobody, you don't see it in history books. What's the problem there?
Yeah. The process of what we choose to remember is very selective. Okay. And basically, the things that evolve in our history book, they fit into certain. For a story to continue, it has to be kind of a story. This seems like a great story, but it's lacking a few things. Okay, first of all, if it bleeds, it leads. Lexington and Concord, we know it bled. That story bled. This story, the power of the people was so overwhelming that not a single drop of blood was shed. Okay, now I take a little bit about that back, just a tad bit, because one other part of this revolution that I didn't mention is the Crown said that the council, which was really powerful, there's basically the General Assembly, the council, and the governor, and the council really ran the show in Massachusetts. And and he says, okay, no longer will they be appointed by the council and the House, but I will appoint them. So the mandamus counselors. And so he appointed 36 people to do that. And every one of them was forced to either resign or run to Boston for safety. So in other words, because that was the only safe haven. In other words, so the only thing close to violence is kind of like the intimidation of these individuals. There were a lot of mob actions to force those guys out. But other than that, there was no it bleeds, it leads. There was no battles or anything. Why? Because when you have 95% of the people going one way and only about 5% the other way, you don't have any violence. And the irony is, if this were a less successful revolution, we'd know about it. And how I can prove that is everybody knows about Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion, 12 years later, was an attempt to replicate this overthrow. And they went to the same courthouse and tried to do the exact same thing. But there they only had about half the people. And so there was conflict, and it didn't, and it succeeded. So we know all about the unsuccessful one and not a word about the one where there was no bloodshed. Okay, I mean, what an irony that is. Okay, now in addition to that, where's the heroes here? Who's gonna like anchor the story? Where's your Paul Revere? Well, that's a whole other mythology, but there's none. You got nobody. What are you going to do? Select one person from each town? I mean, there's no. It's leaderless because it just erupted, and that's the other thing. A revolution is supposed to kind of go from here to here to here to here. Yeah. This is just an eruption, bam, everywhere at once. How do you make a story out of everywhere at once? It doesn't really start and end anywhere. So, without the heroes, without the bloodshed, and also that it's just in the rural hinterlands without the press, it's all the focus of information is more centralized. So So the story just kind of goes nowhere as a story. Now, people at the time knew it very well. And actually, I think when we talk about my subsequent book, The Spirit of 74, we will talk about what the, how that revolution there, how it evolved into what became the American Revolution. And so, and that is a story, but it's a more complex story, and it didn't make the test of simplicity that we demand of our sort of tales, of our Paul Revere's Ride and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, those are items we're going to certainly take up in your next two books that we discuss. But Ray, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. To our viewers and listeners, I've been talking with historian Ray Raphael about his book, The First American Revolution Before Lexington and Concord. My name is Randy Flood. Thank you for watching and listening. Join us again next time for another exciting interview, very substantive interview with an outstanding historian on the real American Revolution. So long for now.